The air in family court is never joyful, but on this crisp October morning, it was thick with a unique brand of poison. On one side of the room sat Richard Peterson, a man whose tailored suit couldn't hide the frayed edges of his morals. Beside him, smirking with the unearned confidence of a victor, was his mistress, Tiffany Cole. She wasn't a party to the divorce, but her presence was a calculated, cruel declaration of war. And on the other side sat Helena Walsh, the wife. To them, she was a ghost, already a relic of a life they had already discarded. They expected tears. They expected a quiet, bitter defeat. They never expected the flash drive in her purse. Helena Walsh and Richard Peterson weren't just married, they were an institution. For 15 years, they had been the golden couple of their affluent Northwood neighborhood. Their house, a sprawling modern colonial with a wraparound porch and meticulously manicured gardens, was the backdrop for countless neighborhood barbecues, charity fundraisers, and holiday parties. Rick, with his easy smile and sharp mind, was a partner at a prestigious downtown investment firm, Peterson and Lynch. Lena, an accomplished architect before she'd stepped back to raise their 2 children, had designed their home herself. Every beam, every window, every light fixture was a testament to her vision of a perfect family life. Their story was the kind people told with a sigh of admiration. They'd met in college. He was the ambitious business major. She was the brilliant artist lost in blueprints. He'd courted her with a fierce determination, promising her a world as stable and beautiful as the structures she designed. And for a long time, he delivered. Their children, Leo and Sophie, were bright and happy. Their life was a seamless tapestry of private school runs, soccer practices, weekend trips to their cabin by the lake, and quiet evenings with expensive wine after the kids were in bed. The first crack in the foundation was almost invisible. It wasn't a dramatic fight or a sudden revelation. It was a slow, creeping chill. It started with the late nights at the office. A big merger, Rick would say, loosening his tie and kissing her absently on the cheek. "You know how it is, honey," the final push. Lena, ever the supportive wife, would have a plate of food waiting for him, which he'd often pick at before claiming exhaustion and heading to bed. Then came the phone. It was a new phone. A sleek, black brick he claimed was a work-only device for security purposes. It was always with him. It lay face down on the nightstand while he slept. It went with him into the bathroom when he showered. Once, when it buzzed with a text message while he was out of the room, Lena had instinctively reached for it, a habit born of years of shared intimacy. The way Rick lunged back into the room, his face a mask of panic, before smoothing into a forced casual smile sent a jolt of ice through her veins. "Just work, Lena. Garrett Shaw's a nightmare. Needs updates at all hours." Garrett Shaw was his top associate. It was plausible. But the panic in Rick's eyes wasn't plausible. It was raw and real. Doubt is a poison ivy. It starts as a single innocent-looking leaf, and before you know it, its tendrils are wrapped around everything, choking the life out of the light. Lena started noticing other things. The scent of a perfume that wasn't hers clinging faintly to his suit jackets, a floral musky scent, far too cloying for her own minimalist tastes. The credit card statements that started arriving with charges from restaurants. She'd never been to cocktail bars in parts of town they never frequented. When she confronted him holding a receipt from a place called the Velvet Orchid, he'd laughed it off. "Client dinner, honey, you know I have to entertain." It was a whole group of us. "You think I'm whining and dining someone on the company card?" He was an expert at gaslighting, turning her valid concerns into accusations of paranoia. He made her feel needy, suspicious, and worst of all, foolish. "Lena, we're rock solid," he'd say, pulling her into a hug that felt more like a restraint. "You and the kids are my world. Don't let stress create problems where there aren't any." She let him convince her. She wanted to be convinced. The alternative was a chasm too terrifying to contemplate. So she buried her doubts and tried harder. She planned romantic dinners, suggested a weekend away without the kids bought new lingerie, but she was trying to resuscitate a body that was already cold. He would go through the motions, but his eyes were distant, his touch mechanical. He was a performer playing the part of a loving husband, and he was getting tired of the role. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in May. It was their 15th wedding anniversary. Lena had spent the day preparing his favourite meal, pan-seared scallops, with a lemon butter sauce, followed by a molten chocolate lava cake she'd perfected. She'd sent the kids to her sister's for the night. The table was set with their best china candles were lit, and a bottle of the Dom Perignon they'd saved from their 10th anniversary was chilling on ice. 7 o'clock came and went, then 8, then 9. Lena's calls went straight to voicemail. She texted her messages moving from loving anticipation to worried pleas, and finally to a cold, hard knot of anger in her stomach. At 10:47 p.m., he finally walked in. He wasn't disheveled or apologetic. He was just empty. He looked at the elaborate setup, the uneaten food, the flickering candles, and his face held only a weary annoyance. "Oh, Lena, I'm so sorry. I completely forgot. We had a crisis with the Tokyo market and my phone died. I just got completely swamped." The lie was so blatant, so disrespectful, it was like a slap in the face. His phone hadn't died, he just hadn't answered. And no market crisis in Tokyo would explain the faint smear of pink lipstick on his collar, or the fact that he smelled not of stale office air, but of fresh air alcohol, and that same musky perfume. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stared at him, and in that moment, she saw him for the first time in years. Not the college sweetheart, not the father of her children, not the partner she had built a life with. She saw a stranger, a liar. "Go take a shower, Rick," she said, her voice eerily calm. "You stink." He recoiled, surprised by her tone. For a second, he looked like he might argue, but something in her eyes stopped him. He mumbled an apology and trudged upstairs. Lena stood alone in her perfect dining room, in her perfect house, surrounded by the ruins of her perfect life. The grief was a physical force threatening to buckle her knees. But underneath the grief, something else was taking root, a cold, hard resolve. She had been made a fool of, but she wouldn't stay one. She needed the truth. Not his version of the truth filtered through lies and condescension, but the real, ugly, unvarnished truth. That night, as Rick snored softly beside her, the deep, untroubled sleep of a man with no conscience, Lena was wide awake, her laptop open. She wasn't looking at divorce lawyers, not yet. She was researching. Her architectural background had made her intimately familiar with home technology security systems and wiring. She typed into the search bar, discrete indoor security cameras, nanny cams, best hidden audio recorders. Her first order arrived 2 days later in a plain brown box. It contained 3 small devices, each no bigger than a USB stick. One was disguised as a phone charger, another as a smoke detector, and the third as a digital clock. She felt a wave of nausea as she held them. This was the ultimate violation of what she once held sacred. She was turning her home, the sanctuary she had designed, into a surveillance state. It was a betrayal of the woman she used to be, but Rick had left her no choice. He had already demolished their sanctuary. She was just shining a light on the rubble. With Rick at work and the kids at school, she set her plan in motion. The phone charger camera went into the wall outlet in their master bedroom, with a clear view of the bed and the entrance. The digital clock went onto the bookshelf in the main living room, the one with the large picture window overlooking the garden. The smoke detector, the most difficult to install, went into the ceiling of Rick's home office, the one room he increasingly used for private calls. She told herself it was just to confirm her suspicions. Once she knew for sure, she would confront him and they would figure out what came next. She had no idea that what she was about to uncover was far worse than a simple affair. She was about to discover a conspiracy to erase her entire existence. The cameras were no longer just about discovering an affair. They were about survival. The first few days of footage were agonizingly mundane. Lena would force herself to watch after Rick had gone to bed, her heart pounding in her chest as she fast-forwarded through hours of an empty house or of herself. Moving through the rooms, a ghost in her own life. She saw Rick come home, kick off his shoes, and slump onto the couch scrolling through his phone. It was almost disappointing. A part of her, the part that still desperately clung to hope, started to believe she was wrong. Maybe he really was just stressed. Maybe she was paranoid. The confirmation came on a Friday. Rick had told her he was flying to Chicago for a 2-day conference. He'd packed a small carry-on, kissed her goodbye with a practiced affection, and reminded her to make sure Leo didn't forget his cleats for his Saturday game. That evening, Lena settled in for her grim ritual. She clicked on the live feed for the master bedroom camera. The room was empty. She checked the living room. Empty. Then she clicked on the home office. The feed was grainy, but the image was clear. Rick was there. He wasn't in Chicago. He was sitting in his leather office chair, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He was laughing, and leaning over his shoulder, her hand tracing a pattern on his chest, was a woman. She had sleek, dark hair and a sharp, angular face. Lena recognized her instantly from company photos. Tiffany Cole, a junior partner at his firm, known for her aggressive tactics and ambition. Lena's breath caught in her throat. Her hands went cold. She watched frozen as Tiffany leaned down and kissed him a long, possessive kiss that was anything but secret. It was casual, familiar. This was not a new or illicit fling. This was a routine. "Are you sure she bought the Chicago story?" Tiffany's voice was sharp, cutting through the silence of Lena's dark kitchen. Rick took a sip of his whiskey and chuckled. The sound was guttural ugly. "Of course. Lena buys everything. It's one of her best qualities. She's trusting." He said the word trusting as if it were a synonym for stupid. "Good," Tiffany said, walking around the desk to perch on the edge of it, crossing her long legs. "Because we need to talk about the timeline. Garrett has the initial asset declaration ready, but it's based on the lowball valuation. We need to get her to sign off before she gets suspicious and hires a forensic accountant." Lena felt the floor drop out from under her. This wasn't just about cheating. They were talking about the divorce. Their divorce. They were actively plotting to defraud her. The man she had spent 15 years building a life with was conspiring with his mistress to strip her of everything. "Don't worry," Rick said, his voice oozing a confidence that made Lena's stomach turn. "I'll handle Lena. I'll play the heartbroken husband torn apart by the pressures of work. I'll make her feel guilty for not being more supportive. By the time I'm done, she'll be so emotionally exhausted, she'll sign anything just to make it stop. She'll probably even agree to a no-fault divorce with minimal alimony. She's never cared about the money, only the family unit." And he said, "Family unit," with a sneer, as if it were the most pathetic concept in the world. Tiffany smiled a predatory, triumphant smile. "And the house, I love this house, but we'll have to sell it right, to split the assets." Rick reached out and stroked her cheek. "We'll sell it, and then we'll buy it back for a fraction of the price through a holding company before the sale even hits the market. Garrett's already working on the paperwork. By the time the ink is dry on the divorce decree, you'll be sleeping in this bed, and Lena will be in some sad little apartment wondering what happened." Lena slammed her laptop shut. A strangled sob escaped her lips, a raw, wounded sound. The betrayal was so complete, so profound, it was breathtaking. It wasn't just infidelity, it was a calculated assassination of her life. They weren't just stealing her husband, they were stealing her home, her security, her future. They were discussing her as if she were a business problem to be managed, an obstacle to be removed. The grief came first, a tsunami that left her gasping for air on the kitchen floor. Then came the anger. It was a white-hot, purifying rage. The woman who had wanted to save her marriage was gone. In her place was a woman who wanted justice. She didn't delete the footage, she saved it. She created a new password-protected folder on an external hard drive labeling it Insurance. Over the next 3 weeks, Lena became a ghost in her own home, an actress playing a part just as much as Rick was. She was the dutiful wife, packing lunches, helping with homework, listening to his fabricated stories about work. But inside she was a detective, an archivist of his deceit. She downloaded footage every night. She captured hours of them. Rick and Tiffany in the living room, drinking their wine from her glasses, critiquing her taste in art. Rick and Tiffany in her bedroom, in her bed. That was the hardest to watch, a violation so deep it felt physical. But she forced herself to watch, to listen. Because mixed in with their sordid encounters was the evidence she needed. They talked about everything. They discussed which assets Rick had already moved to an offshore account under his mother's name. They laughed about the joint savings account they had been slowly draining for months, masking the withdrawals as business expenses. They detailed their plan for the divorce proceedings. Rick would file first, ended claiming irreconcilable differences, painting himself as a tragic figure. He would offer her a settlement that seemed generous on the surface, but was in reality a pittance compared to their actual net worth. The most damning piece of evidence came a week before Rick finally confessed. The camera in his office captured a video call between Rick Tiffany and his lawyer, Garrett Shaw. The key, Garrett said, his slick face filling the screen, is to establish a narrative of marital drift. We don't want to give her anything to fight against. No fault, no blame. Just two people who grew apart. We offer her the Northwood house, knowing full well she can't afford the upkeep and taxes on her own, and a lump sum that will seem huge to her. She'll feel like she's winning. And the offshore accounts, the pre-IPO shares in the Henderson Tech Fund, Rick asked, his voice betraying a hint of anxiety. She doesn't know they exist, Garrett said dismissively. What Helena doesn't know can't hurt us. Your official asset disclosure will be clean as a whistle. Just make sure you stick to the script, Rick. You're heartbroken. This is the hardest thing you've ever had to do. You'll always love her as the mother of your children. Lay it on thick. Tiffany, sitting next to Rick, smirked. He's good at that. He's had a lot of practice. Lena saved the entire video call. It was her smoking gun. A week later, Rick sat her down in the living room in the exact spot where he and Tiffany had plotted her financial ruin. He held her hand, his eyes filled with expertly crafted tears. Lena, he began, his voice thick with fake emotion. This is the hardest thing I've ever had to do. I think we need to separate. He launched into the script Garrett Shaw had written for him. He talked about growing apart, about the pressures of his job, about how he felt he was losing himself. He said he would always love her, that she was a wonderful mother, but he just couldn't do it anymore. He never once mentioned Tiffany. Lena listened, her face a carefully constructed mask of shock and heartbreak. She let her own tears fall, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage and a strange, bitter relief. The war had finally been declared. I don't understand, Rick, she whispered, playing her part perfectly. I thought we were happy. I know, he said, stroking her hair. I'm so sorry. I'll make sure you and the kids are taken care of. I'll be more than fair. Lena looked at the man she had loved, the man who was now promising to be fair while actively planning to destroy her. She felt a cold, hard clarity settle over her. He had underestimated her. They both had. They saw her as a trusting, emotional, foolish woman. They were about to find out how wrong they were. The next morning, while Rick was at the office, presumably celebrating with Tiffany, Lena Walsh made 2 calls. The first was to the best divorce attorney in the state, a bulldog named Brenda Davies. The second was to a data recovery specialist to ensure her insurance policy was perfectly preserved. Ms. Davies, Lena said into the phone, her voice steady and clear. "My name is Helena Walsh. My husband is about to file for divorce. I have reason to believe he is hiding significant assets and colluding with his legal counsel to defraud me. And I have proof." Brenda Davies was a woman who had seen it all. Her office, in a sleek high-rise that overlooked the city, was decorated in cool greys and sharp chrome, a reflection of her no-nonsense demeanour. She was in her late 50s, with a shock of silver hair cut in a severe bob and eyes that could dissect a lie from 20 paces. She listened to Lena's story with an impassive expression, her fingers steepled under her chin. When Lena finished, Brenda leaned back in her chair. "It's a classic, Mrs. Walsh. The high-powered husband, the younger colleague, the hidden assets. The only unusual element is your evidence." "It's on this drive," Lena said, pushing the encrypted flash drive across the polished desk. "Video and audio. It's comprehensive." Brenda raised an eyebrow. "And how was this evidence obtained?" "Cameras. In my home. The home I share with my husband." "Ah," Brenda sighed. "Therein lies the problem. Admissibility. Your husband's lawyer, Garrett Shaw, and I know him, he's a snake, will argue that this is an illegal recording, a violation of his expectation of privacy." "In our shared home? In our bedroom?" Lena asked a note of desperation in her voice. "He was bringing his mistress into our bed and plotting to steal the money, meant for our children's future. What about my privacy?" "I'm not disagreeing with you morally," Brenda said, her tone softening slightly. "I'm telling you the legal hurdles we face. A judge might throw it out. We can't build our entire case around it. We'll use it as leverage, but we also have to fight this the old-fashioned way. We'll file for discovery, we'll subpoena his bank records, we'll hire a forensic accountant of our own." For the next 6 months, Lena's life became a grueling marathon of legal strategy and emotional warfare. Just as he'd planned, Rick filed for divorce first. The petition was a work of fiction, citing irreconcilable differences and painting a picture of a gentle, amicable parting. It was accompanied by an initial settlement offer that was on the surface generous. He offered her the house full custody of the children and a lump sum of $1.5 million. Lena's old self, the woman from before the cameras, might have been tempted. The house was her masterpiece, her sanctuary. The money seemed like a fortune. But the new Lena, the one who had watched hours of her husband's betrayal, knew better. "The house is a trap," Lena told Brenda, sitting in her lawyer's office. "The property taxes alone are over $100,000 a year. The upkeep is another 50. He knows I can't afford it on my own. He wants me to be forced to sell it in a fire sale in a year or two, and his holding company will be waiting to snap it up." "And the lump sum?" Brenda asked. "Our forensic accountant, Mr. Delmod Chen, found traces of accounts Rick has been funneling money into for years," Lena replied, pointing to a thick binder on the table. "The offshore account in the Cayman Islands, the portfolio of tech stocks he bought through a shell corporation. Mr. Chen estimates his hidden assets are worth at a minimum north of $15 million, not including his vested interest in his firm." "So the generous offer is less than 10% of what you're actually owed," Brenda stated, a grim smile playing on her lips. "Garrett Shaw is getting cocky." The pre-trial process was brutal. Rick and his legal team played dirty. They filed motion after motion, trying to bleed Lena dry with legal fees. They sent over thousands of pages of financial documents, deliberately burying relevant information in a sea of trivialities. The deposition was the worst. It took place in a sterile conference room at Garrett Shaw's firm. Lena sat at one end of a long mahogany table with Brenda by her side. Across from them sat Rick, looking tan and relaxed, and Garrett Shaw, looking like a shark that had just smelled blood. Tiffany wasn't there, but her presence hung in the air like cheap perfume. For 6 hours, Garrett Shaw questioned Lena. He was polite, almost charming, but his questions were designed to paint her as an unstable, vindictive, and greedy woman. "Mrs. Walsh," he began, "isn't it true that you haven't been employed as an architect for nearly 14 years? "I stepped back to raise our children," Lena said, her voice steady. "A noble choice," Shaw said, with a condescending smile. "So you haven't contributed financially to the marital estate in over a decade?" "My husband and I decided that my contribution would be raising our family and managing our household, which allowed him the freedom to build his career." Lena countered, refusing to be baited. He moved on, twisting her words, her life. He brought up the therapy she'd sought when she first felt the marriage crumbling, framing it as evidence of emotional instability. He implied that her desire for a fair settlement was nothing more than a cash grab from a woman who didn't want to work. Through it all, Rick sat there avoiding her gaze occasionally, nodding in agreement with his lawyer. He was a stranger to her, a hollow man. She looked at him and felt nothing but a cold, deep pity. He had destroyed everything for a life that was at its core as fake as his courtroom persona. The turning point in the deposition came when Garrett Shaw broached the subject of infidelity. "Mrs. Walsh, in your counter-petition, you allege that your husband was unfaithful. Do you have any concrete proof of this allegation?" he asked, his tone dripping with skepticism. Brenda had advised her not to reveal her trump card. Not yet. The element of surprise was everything. Rick knows what he did," Lena said, looking directly at her husband for the first time that day. His eyes flickered with something fear, perhaps, before his mask of indifference snapped back into place. "So the answer is no," Shaw concluded smugly. "You have no proof, just suspicions. Suspicions from a woman who, by her own admission, has been struggling with emotional issues." Lena clenched her fists under the table, but she held her tongue. Brenda gave her a subtle, reassuring nod. The trap was being set. They were building their entire case on a foundation of lies, confident that she had no way to expose them. After the deposition, Rick, feeling emboldened, tightened the screws. He began missing child support payments, claiming his assets were frozen pending the divorce. He told their mutual friends that Lena was being unreasonable and vindictive, turning people against her. He was trying to break her to force her to accept his paltry offer. Tiffany Cole, meanwhile, grew more brazen. She was seen driving Rick's Porsche. She started posting vaguely triumphant messages on her private social media. Things like, "The future is bright," and "Out with the old, in with the new," which were promptly screenshotted by one of Lena's few remaining loyal friends and sent to her. Lena felt the pressure mounting. There were days she wanted to give up, to take the offer and run just to escape the constant stress and pain. But then she would think of Leo and Sophie. She would think of the 15 years she had invested, the love she had given, the life she had built. And she would think of the footage on that flash drive. She and Brenda prepared meticulously for the hearing. They had their forensic accountant's report, which detailed as best as possible the trail of hidden money. But it was still circumstantial. Rick's lawyers could argue it was speculative. The video was the key. The judge is Annabelle Coleman," Brenda told Lena in their final meeting before the hearing. "She's tough, but she's fair. She has no patience for liars. Rick and his lawyer are going to walk in there and perjure themselves. They're going to lie about the affair, they're going to lie about the finances, and they're going to lie about their collusion. And when they have built their house of cards as high as it will go, we're going to burn it to the ground." Brenda looked at the flash drive on her desk. "We will introduce this footage not as evidence of the affair itself, but as evidence of perjury. When Rick denies the affair under oath, when he denies hiding assets under oath, this video will become admissible to impeach his testimony. He's going to hand us the gun, and Garrett Shaw is going to load it for him. All we have to do is pull the trigger." On the morning of the divorce hearing, Lena Walsh woke up not with fear, but with a steely resolve. She chose her outfit carefully, a simple, elegant navy blue dress. It was professional, serious, and understated. She wasn't a victim seeking pity. She was a woman seeking justice. As she put the small silver flash drive into her purse, she thought of Tiffany's smug face of Rick's condescending lies. They had planned a quick and quiet execution of her life. They had no idea she was coming to a gunfight with a cannon. The courtroom was smaller than Lena had imagined, panelled in dark wood that seemed to absorb all the light and sound. The air was heavy with the ghosts of 1,000 other shattered families. Lena and Brenda sat at the table on the left. Across the aisle, Rick sat with Garrett Shaw. And in the front row of the public gallery, directly in Lena's line of sight, sat Tiffany Cole. She was dressed in a vibrant red power suit, a stark slash of colour in the sombre room. Her legs were crossed, her makeup was perfect, and she wore a small, self-satisfied smirk. She was there as a spectator at the public execution of Lena's marriage, a victor surveying her spoils. Every so often, she would catch Rick's eye and give him a subtle, encouraging nod. It was a performance of breathtaking arrogance. Judge Annabel Coleman entered a formidable presence in her black robes. She had a reputation for being impatient with theatrics and laser-focused on facts. "Mr. Shaw," she said, her voice crisp, "you may begin." Garrett Shaw rose smooth and confident. He launched into the narrative they had rehearsed. He spoke of a marriage that had simply run its course. He praised Rick's generosity, highlighting the settlement offer that was still on the table. "Your Honor," Shaw said, "Mr. Peterson is not here to cast blame. He wishes Mrs. Walsh nothing but the best. He has made a settlement offer that is more than fair, an offer that would leave Mrs. Walsh with the family home and significant financial security. We are here today only because Mrs. Walsh, for reasons we can only speculate, has refused this generous offer and has chosen instead to engage in this costly and emotionally draining litigation." He made it sound as if Lena were the unreasonable one, a greedy opportunist holding them all hostage. Lena's hands were clammy, but she kept her face impassive, just as Brenda had instructed. Then it was Rick's turn to take the stand. He swore the oath, his hand on the Bible, his eyes directed piously at the judge. Garrett Shaw led him through a series of gentle questions. "Mr. Peterson," Shaw asked, "has your marriage been a happy one?" "For a long time, yes," Rick said, his voice laced with a well-rehearsed sadness. "But over the last few years, we just grew apart. My work became more demanding. We lost our connection." "Were there any third parties involved in the breakdown of your marriage?" Shaw asked, the questions hanging in the air. Rick looked directly at Judge Coleman. "No, sir, absolutely not. My marriage ended because we fell out of love. It's tragic, but it's that simple. There was no one else." Lena saw Tiffany preen in the front row. It was a masterful lie delivered with complete conviction. Shaw moved on to the finances. He presented Rick's official asset disclosure, a document Lena and Brenda knew to be a work of fiction. "Mr. Peterson, is this document a full and accurate accounting of your assets?" "Yes, it is," Rick said firmly. "Everything is there. There are no hidden accounts, no offshore holdings, no shell corporations." "No," Rick lied again, without a flicker of hesitation. "I have been completely transparent." Garrett Shaw sat down, looking pleased with himself. His client had presented himself as a heartbroken, honest and generous man, being railroaded by a bitter ex-wife. The case seemed open and shut. Judge Coleman turned her gaze to their table. "Ms. Davies, your witness." Brenda Davies walked slowly to the lectern. She was calm, methodical. She started gently. "Mr. Peterson, you just testified under oath that there was no third party involved in the dissolution of your marriage. Is that correct?" "Yes, that's correct," Rick said, a little impatiently. "So you have never been romantically involved with a colleague at your firm, a Ms. Tiffany Cole. Rick's eyes darted nervously toward Garrett Shaw, who gave a slight shake of his head. "No," Rick said. "Ms. Cole is a valued colleague. Our relationship is strictly professional." In the gallery, Tiffany Cole crossed her arms, the smirk on her face widening. She was untouchable. "And you testified that your financial disclosure is complete and accurate," Brenda continued. "Yes, as I said." "So you have no knowledge of, for example, an account at the Cayman Equity Bank and Trust?" Rick's composure finally cracked. A flicker of panic crossed his face. I don't know what you're talking about." "You don't?" Brenda asked, her voice turning to steel. "And you have no knowledge of a holding company by the name of Northwood Ventures LLC being set up to purchase a certain property should it come on the market?" Rick was starting to sweat. "This is ridiculous. My ex-wife is feeding you fantasies. She's paranoid." Brenda paused, letting his words hang in the air. "Mr. Peterson, you have testified under oath that you were not having an affair and that you did not hide marital assets. Is there anything you would like to change about that testimony?" "No," Rick snapped. "I'm telling the truth." Brenda turned to the judge. "Your Honor, we have evidence that will directly impeach the witness's testimony. Evidence that will prove Mr. Peterson has just committed perjury multiple times." Garrett Shaw shot to his feet. "Objection? What is this? Some kind of ambush Ms. Davies is fishing." "I am not fishing, Your Honor," Brenda said calmly, walking back to the table and picking up the silver flash drive. "I am presenting proof. With the court's permission, I would like to play a video." The video was recorded in the marital home, a property jointly owned by Mr. Peterson and Mrs. Walsh, and it contains footage of Mr. Peterson discussing the very subjects on which he has just provided false testimony. Judge Coleman looked intrigued. "Mr. Shaw, your objection is on what grounds?" "Privacy, Your Honor. This is an illegal recording." "Ms. Davies," the judge asked. "Your Honor." Brenda argued, "While the admissibility of such a recording to prove the affair itself might be debatable, its admissibility to prove perjury is well established. Mr. Peterson chose to lie under oath. This evidence directly refutes those lies. He has opened this door himself." Judge Coleman considered for a long moment. The courtroom was silent. Tiffany Cole was no longer smirking. She was leaning forward, her face tight with anxiety. "I'll allow it," Judge Coleman declared. "The primary purpose, as stated, is to address the credibility of the testimony given here today. Proceed." A court officer took the flash drive and inserted it into the courtroom's AV system. A large monitor, previously dark, flickered to life. Garrett Shaw looked apoplectic. Rick's face had gone ashen. The video began. It was the footage from Rick's home office. The quality was clear. There was Rick sitting in his chair, and there was Tiffany perched on his desk. The audio filled the silent courtroom. Tiffany: "Are you sure she bought the Chicago story?" Rick: "Of course. Lena buys everything. It's one of her best qualities. She's trusting." A collective gasp went through the small gallery. Tiffany Cole sank back in her seat, her face turning from pale to a blotchy red. She looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. Brenda fast-forwarded the footage. Let's skip to the financial planning session. Shall we?" She stopped at the part where they discussed the house. Tiffany: "And the house, I love this house, but we'll have to sell it right." "To split the assets." Rick: "We'll sell it and then we'll buy it back for a fraction of the price through a holding company. By the time the ink is dry, you'll be sleeping in this bed and Lena will be in some sad little apartment wondering what happened." Rick stared at the screen, his mouth hanging open. He looked at the judge, at his lawyer, at Lena. His entire world was imploding in high definition. But Brenda wasn't done. "And now, Your Honor, the video call with legal counsel, where they strategize how to defraud my client and mislead this very court." She played the final most damning clip, the video call with Garrett Shaw. Garrett Shaw on screen. The key is to establish a narrative of marital drift. What Helena doesn't know can't hurt us. Your official asset disclosure will be clean as a whistle. Just make sure you stick to the script, Rick. You're heartbroken. Garrett Shaw, standing in the courtroom, looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. His own words, his own face convicting him of conspiracy to commit fraud. Brenda paused the video. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Every eye was on Rick, who sat in the witness box, utterly broken. The smugness had evaporated from Tiffany Cole, replaced by sheer panic as she bolted from her seat and fled the courtroom. Lena didn't look at any of them. She looked at Judge Coleman. The judge's face was a mask of cold fury. She removed her glasses and stared down at Rick Peterson. "Mr. Peterson." Judge Coleman said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Rick just shook his head, unable to speak. "I didn't think so," the judge said. She turned her glare on Garrett Shaw. "And Mr. Shaw, I suspect we will be having a separate conversation with the State Bar Association. You may be seated." She looked at the evidence binder, then at Lena, and finally back at Rick. "The court finds Mr. Peterson's testimony to be not credible. In fact, it finds his testimony to be a deliberate and malicious attempt to defraud his wife and this court. The pretense of this hearing is over." Lena took a slow, deep breath. It wasn't a breath of triumph or revenge. It was a breath of pure, unadulterated relief. The storm had broken. The truth was out. And it was more powerful than any lie they could ever have constructed. The immediate aftermath in the courtroom was not chaos, but a silence so profound it felt like a physical presence. The echo of Judge Coleman's gavel seemed to have fractured the very air, leaving everyone suspended in the crystalline moment of a world irrevocably changed. Lena watched her body numb, but her senses hyper-aware as Tiffany Cole's carefully constructed composure shattered. The vibrant red of her suit seemed to mock her now, a garish flag of defeat. A strangled sound, half sob, half gasp, escaped her lips before she scrambled from her seat. The sharp, panicked clatter of her heels on the polished floor was the only sound in the room as she fled a public humiliation. So complete, it was almost pitiful. Judge Coleman's fury, however, was far from spent. It had merely transitioned from a hot rage to a glacial deliberate force. She leveled a gaze at Garrett Shaw, who stood, frozen his face, the color of old parchment. "Mr. Shaw," she said, her voice dangerously low, "your conduct has been unethical and frankly appalling. It is an insult to your profession and this court. I will be filing a formal complaint with the State Bar for suborning perjury and conspiracy to commit fraud before I leave this bench today. I suggest you find yourself a very good lawyer." Then her gaze, sharp as a shard of glass, fell upon Rick. He had collapsed back into his chair at the defendant's table, all the swagger and tailored arrogance gone, leaving behind a hollowed-out man who seemed to shrink inside his expensive suit. He stared at nothing, his hands lying limp on the table, his world having been systematically dismantled before his eyes. "Mr. Peterson," the judge continued each word, a hammer blow, "you have committed perjury. You have lied under oath multiple times with a contemptuous disregard for the law. Let me be clear, this is not a civil matter anymore. The district attorney's office will be receiving a full transcript of this hearing, along with the video evidence that so thoroughly exposed your deceit. You have not only destroyed your marriage, but you have also very likely destroyed your career and your freedom." The judgment that followed was not a negotiation, it was a demolition. Judge Coleman awarded Lena everything she had asked for, and more meticulously listing each point as if chiseling it into stone. 70% of the total marital assets, with specific reference to the fully valued Cayman Islands account and the Henderson Tech portfolio. The court would appoint a special master she declared to oversee the liquidation and transfer, ensuring Rick could not hide another penny. Furthermore, the judge announced, Mrs. Walsh is awarded sole and exclusive ownership of the marital home in Northwood, free and clear of any claim by Mr. Peterson. As a punitive measure for his attempt to defraud her of this very property, Mr. Peterson will be responsible for paying all associated property taxes for the next 5 years. A tremor went through Rick's body at that. Lena was granted full legal and physical custody of Leo and Sophie. Rick's visitation rights were to be for the foreseeable future, supervised and contingent upon him completing a full psychological evaluation. The alimony figure was staggering a number, designed not just for support, but as a clear and public punishment for his egregious conduct. Garrett Shaw was now whispering frantically into Rick's ear a desperate hissed stream of legal jargon, but Rick didn't seem to hear him. He finally lifted his head, his eyes finding Lena's across the room. There was no anger left in them, no hatred, just a bottomless, bewildered shock. It was the look of a master manipulator who had finally met a reality he couldn't control, a man who had gambled everything on the certainty of his wife's weakness and lost spectacularly. As the judge concluded the session and rose to leave, Brenda Davies placed a firm, warm hand on Lena's arm. The courtroom began to stir, a low murmur filling the void. "You did it, Lena," Brenda said, her voice filled with a rare, deep admiration. "You did it." Lena took a slow, deep breath, the first one that seemed to reach the bottom of her lungs in over a year. It wasn't a breath of triumph or revenge. It was a breath of pure, unadulterated release. The weight she had been carrying for so long, the doubt, the fear, the gaslighting was finally blessedly gone. The weeks that followed were a surreal blur. The story of the explosive hearing became the talk of the town's legal and financial circles. Lena saw the headline one morning while scrolling the news on her tablet. Peterson and Lynch partner implodes in divorce court. Faces perjury charges after wife reveals hidden camera footage. Seeing her private agony transformed into public spectacle was jarring, but it also felt like a validation. The truth wasn't just her truth anymore. It was the truth. The professional consequences for Rick were swift and merciless. Peterson and Lynch, in a desperate act of brand preservation, forced his resignation, buying out his partnership for a fraction of its value to cover anticipated legal fees and the damage to their reputation. Garrett Shaw was suspended by the state bar, within a week, his career in ruins. And Tiffany Cole, as Lena heard from a friend, had been quietly fired for unprofessional conduct. She'd cleared out her desk and her apartment, vanishing from the city like a ghost, her ambitious dreams turning to ash. A week after the hearing, Rick called. His name flashed on her phone screen, and for a split second, a Pavlovian response, honed over 15 years, urged her to answer. A wave of memories, good and bad, crashed over her. Then just as quickly, the new reality asserted itself. He was no longer her husband, her partner, her problem. He was a man who had tried to erase her. With a steady hand, Lena pressed the decline button and then deliberately navigated to his contact and pressed block. A profound sense of peace washed over her. It wasn't an act of anger, it was an act of closure. She was closing the door, locking it and walking away. The meeting with the court-appointed special master a month later was the final tangible proof of her victory. Sitting in Brenda's office, she looked at a spreadsheet that detailed Rick's hidden empire. The numbers were staggering, far more than even their forensic accountant had estimated. Seeing the long strings of zeros representing the funds in the Cayman account, funds meant to be stolen from her, and her children made her stomach clench. But this time, it was followed by the deep, grounding security of knowings that her children's futures were safe. She had done more than win a house. She had secured their lives. 6 months later, Lena stood on the wraparound porch of the Northwood house. It was a crisp, perfect autumn day. The maple tree on the lawn was a riot of red and gold. For months after the hearing, she'd considered selling the house, believing its walls would forever hold the echoes of Rick's betrayal. She worried she would always see Tiffany's ghost in the living room, or hear their conspiratorial whispers in the office. But today, she felt different. She walked through the rooms, which no longer felt like a crime scene. She ran her hand along the cool marble of the kitchen island where she'd cried that first night. She stood in the center of the master bedroom, the place of his ultimate violation, and felt nothing. The ghosts were gone. She realized the house wasn't tainted. It was a survivor just like her. She hadn't just fought for it, she had cleansed it. It was a monument not to a failed marriage, but to her own unyielding resilience. The changes were quiet but profound. Leo, who had grown quiet and withdrawn during the last year of the marriage, was now loud and boisterous, his laughter echoing through the halls again. Sophie, her sensitive daughter, had started crawling into her bed in the mornings, just to talk a simple intimacy they hadn't shared in years. They were healing because the source of the poison had been removed. Lena herself was being reborn. She had enrolled in an online master's program for sustainable architecture, and she felt a fire in her belly. She hadn't felt since college. The thrill of wrestling with a complex design of creating something beautiful and functional from nothing was intoxicating. It was a part of her she thought had been lost forever, buried under years of carpools and PTA meetings. She was no longer just a mother or an ex-wife. She was Helena Walsh, architect. Her life wasn't a perfect, happily ever after fairy tale. There were still evenings when the house felt too big, the silence too loud. There were still fleeting moments of sadness, a dull ache for the man she had once loved, and the future she had once believed in. But the sadness was different now. It was a mature acknowledgement of a past that was truly in the past, a scar that had healed over no longer an open wound. That ache was being replaced by the steady, quiet hum of possibility. She looked out at her garden, thinking of the spring bulbs lying dormant under the soil, waiting for their season to bloom. She felt like one of them. She had survived the long, cold winter of her husband's deceit. Now it was her time to grow. The smug mistress and the cheating husband were just footnotes in a closed chapter. Before her was a blank page, a clean blueprint, and for the first time in a very long time, she was the one holding the pen. Helena Walsh's story is a powerful reminder that the truth is the most powerful weapon of all. She was underestimated, gaslit, and pushed to the brink, but she refused to be a victim in her own life. By seeking the truth, she not only exposed a web of lies, but also found her own strength and started a new chapter, free and empowered. Her journey shows us that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to fight back, to demand justice, and to rebuild our lives on a foundation of self-respect. What did you think of Lena's incredible strategy? Was she right to use the hidden cameras? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of resilience and justice resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life drama.